The words, "just a waitress," hung in the air like poison at my husband's family Thanksgiving dinner. But what happened 30 minutes later would shatter their world of assumptions forever. When the lawyer's call came through announcing my $80 million inheritance, the silence around that mahogany table was worth every year of their condescension. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The crystal chandelier cast elegant shadows across the Blackwood family's dining room in their sprawling Westchester estate, illuminating faces that had perfected the art of polite disdain. I sat at the far end of their antique mahogany table, the one that had supposedly been in the family for 6 generations, feeling like an unwelcome guest at my own husband's Thanksgiving celebration. "Sophia, dear, could you pass the gravy?" Victoria Blackwood's voice dripped with the kind of false sweetness that barely concealed contempt. My mother-in-law had mastered the art of making even simple requests sound like royal commands issued to the help. Reached for the silver gravy boat, its weight substantial in my hands. Everything in this house was designed to remind you of old money, old prestige, old blood that apparently ran thicker than love. "Of course, Victoria," I replied, maintaining the composure I'd cultivated through 3 years of these family gatherings. "You know," Victoria continued, her pale blue eyes fixed on me with laser precision, "I was just telling the Hendersons at the country club about Marcus's career progression at the law firm. Such a promising young partner. Of course, they were curious about his domestic arrangements." The pause before domestic arrangements landed like a carefully aimed dart. Marcus, my husband of 4 years, shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his dark eyes avoiding mine as they always did when his mother began her subtle assassinations of my character. "What Victoria means," added Harrison Blackwood from the head of the table, his silver mustache twitching with barely contained superiority, "is that we explained how you're still working at that little diner downtown. What's it called again? Rosie's?" "Ruby's Corner Cafe," I corrected quietly, though the name of my workplace had been mentioned at least 50 times over the years. Their selective memory wasn't accidental. Right, Harrison waved dismissively, carving the turkey with theatrical precision. "Ruby's, such a quaint establishment. Very blue-collar clientele, I imagine." Marcus finally found his voice, though it lacked any real conviction. "Dad, Sophia's work is perfectly respectable. She's actually the assistant manager now." The collective pause that followed felt calculated, rehearsed even. Victoria's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "Assistant manager at a diner. How ambitious." I felt the familiar heat rising in my cheeks, the same burning shame that had accompanied every family gathering, every country club event, every law firm dinner where I was introduced as Marcus's wife with that particular tone that suggested they were still surprised he'd married so far beneath his station. "I suppose we all have different definitions of success," I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. "Indeed we do," Victoria agreed, her smile sharp enough to cut crystal. "Some people are content with simpler aspirations. There's nothing wrong with being just a waitress, dear. Someone has to serve the coffee." The phrase hit its target perfectly. Just a waitress. 3 words that summarized their entire assessment of my worth, my contribution to their precious family legacy, my place in their carefully constructed social hierarchy. Marcus's younger sister, Priscilla, decided to join the assault with characteristic enthusiasm. "I was telling my friends at Barnard about how refreshing it is that Marcus married someone so down to earth, like literally from the ground up." Her laugh was even more grating than her mother's. "Priscilla," Marcus warned half-heartedly. But the damage was already cascading around the table like dominoes falling in slow motion. "What? I think it's sweet," Priscilla continued, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "Not everyone can marry within their social circle. Some people have to diversify. Though I do worry about the children you'll have someday. Will they understand which fork to use at proper dinner parties? The room fell silent, except for the gentle clink of silverware against china and the distant sound of autumn wind rattling the mansion's windows. I stared down at my barely touched plate, fighting the familiar urge to excuse myself, to retreat to the bathroom and compose myself before returning to smile through the rest of this elaborate humiliation. But something felt different tonight. Maybe it was the 4th year of enduring these performances. Or maybe it was the way Marcus sat there like a statue, offering no real defense of the woman he'd promised to honor and protect. Whatever it was, a small flame of rebellion began to flicker in my chest. "You know what's interesting about assumptions?" I said quietly, my voice cutting through the oppressive silence like a knife through silk. Victoria raised one perfectly, sculpted eyebrow. "Oh, do enlighten us, dear." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed against the table with an unfamiliar number. I glanced at the screen, expecting another robocall or wrong number, but something about the formal display made me hesitate. "Aren't you going to answer that?" Harrison asked with mock concern. "Perhaps someone needs their order taken?" The cruel laughter that rippled around the table would have normally sent me retreating into myself, but tonight it only fueled the fire building inside me. I looked around at their smug faces, their casual cruelty, their absolute certainty about their superiority over the waitress who had somehow infiltrated their bloodline. None of them could have imagined that the call I was about to answer would reveal that their just a waitress daughter-in-law was about to become one of the wealthiest women in New York State. None of them could have predicted that in 30 minutes, every assumption they'd ever made about social class, worth, and superiority would crumble around them like their precious old mansion in an earthquake. I answered the phone. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and completely unfamiliar. "Is this Sophia Chen Blackwood?" "Yes, this is Sophia," I replied, acutely aware that every eye around the Thanksgiving table was now focused on me with varying degrees of annoyance and curiosity. "Ms. Chen Blackwood, this is Theodore Pemberton from Pemberton, Hayes & Associates. I'm calling regarding the estate of Eleanor Chen Whitmore. I'm afraid I have some rather urgent news that requires your immediate attention." The name hit me like a physical blow. Eleanor Chen Whitmore, my grandmother's sister, the family member who had vanished from our lives when I was barely 5 years old. The black sheep, as my mother had always called her, who had disappeared into shameful circumstances that were never fully explained to curious children. "I'm sorry," I managed, my voice suddenly unsteady. "Could you repeat that name?" "Eleanor. Chen Whitmore. She was your great-aunt, your grandmother Lily Chen's younger sister. I understand there may have been estrangement in the family, but you are listed as her sole beneficiary." The Blackwood family's collective attention sharpened like predators sensing wounded prey. Victoria's fork paused halfway to her mouth, while Harrison leaned forward with the expression of someone overhearing gossip at the country club. "Beneficiary?" I repeated, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. "Yes, ma'am. Ms. Whitmore passed away 3 weeks ago in her home in Napa Valley. She left very specific instructions that you were to be contacted immediately following the reading of her will. I've been trying to reach you for several days, but this was the first number that connected." My mind reeled, trying to process this information while simultaneously managing the increasingly intense scrutiny from across the table. Great-Aunt Eleanor, the mysterious figure who had been whispered about in hushed tones during my childhood, was dead. And apparently, she had remembered me. "I'm not sure I understand," I said carefully. What exactly did she leave?" Theodore Pemberton's pause felt weighted with significance. "Ms. Chen Blackwood, I think this conversation would be better handled in person, or at least in a more private setting. The estate is quite substantial, and there are numerous legal documents that require your signature." "Substantial how?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. Another pause. The liquid assets alone are valued at approximately $80 million. The real estate holdings, business interests, and investment portfolio bring the total estate value to well over $120 million. The words hit the dining room like a bomb detonating in slow motion. I watched the color drain from Victoria's face, saw Harrison's hand freeze with his wine glass halfway to his lips, observed Priscilla's jaw literally drop open in a way that would have been comical under different circumstances. "I'm sorry," I whispered, certain I had misheard. "Did you say 80 million? "In liquid assets, yes, ma'am. Your great-aunt was quite successful in her various business ventures. She owned a chain of luxury resorts, had significant holdings in technology companies, and maintained a diverse investment portfolio that performed exceptionally well over the past 4 decades. The silence around the Thanksgiving table was deafening. Marcus stared at me as if I had suddenly sprouted wings, while his parents sat frozen in their chairs like mannequins in a high-end department store window. "Mr. Pemberton," I managed, my voice gaining strength as the reality began to sink in. "I need to clarify something. Are you absolutely certain you have the right person? I'm a waitress, assistant manager, at a small cafe in Manhattan. There has to be some mistake." "No mistake, Ms. Chen Blackwood. Your great-aunt was very specific. She included several personal details in her instructions to ensure we reached the correct Sophia Chen. You were born on March 15, 1994, in Queens, New York. Your mother was Linda Chen, who worked as a seamstress. Your father passed away when you were 12. You have a small scar on your left hand from a childhood accident involving a broken teacup." I looked down at my left hand, at the thin white line near my thumb that I'd carried since I was 7 years old. The scar Eleanor had kissed and bandaged during one of her rare visits to our cramped Queens apartment, before whatever family drama had occurred that made her disappear from our lives forever. "She remembered," I whispered, more to myself than to the lawyer. "She remembered everything, Ms. Chen Blackwood. Her will includes a letter addressed specifically to you, explaining her absence from your life and her reasons for this inheritance. She was quite adamant that you should know the full truth about your family history." Victoria finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a croak. $80 million? I looked up to see 4 faces staring at me with expressions ranging from shock to disbelief to something that might have been growing respect. The same people who had spent the last hour casually demolishing my self-worth were now looking at me as if I had been revealed as visiting royalty traveling incognito. "Mr. Pemberton," I said, standing up from the table with a composure I didn't entirely feel, "I think you're right about needing to discuss this privately. Could we schedule a meeting for tomorrow morning?" "Certainly. My office is in Midtown. Manhattan, shall we say 10 o'clock? I'll have all the documentation prepared for your review." "That would be perfect. Thank you for calling." As I ended the call, the dining room remained trapped in stunned silence. The only sounds were the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway and the distant hum of the kitchen appliances where the housekeeper was undoubtedly preparing dessert for a family dinner that had just been turned completely upside down. Harrison cleared his throat, a sound that seemed to echo off the oil paintings of distinguished Blackwood ancestors lining the walls. "Sophia," he began, his voice completely different from the condescending tone he'd used throughout dinner. "Perhaps we should discuss—" "Discuss what?" I interrupted, feeling a surge of power I'd never experienced in this house before. "How I'm just a waitress? How my blue-collar background is such an embarrassment to your family name?" Victoria's face had gone from pale to flushed. "Now, dear, I think there may have been some misunderstanding about—" "No misunderstanding," I said firmly, looking around the table at each face in turn. I heard every word perfectly clearly. The question is, what exactly has changed in the last 5 minutes? I'm the same person I was when you were explaining to the Hendersons how embarrassing my job is. The transformation in their expressions was remarkable to witness. Marcus looked like he was watching a stranger, while his parents and sister appeared, to be rapidly recalculating everything they thought they knew about family dynamics and social hierarchies. But I wasn't finished. Not even close. The weight of $80 million settled around the dining room like a thick fog, transforming the very air we breathed. I remained standing, watching as the Blackwood family processed this seismic shift in their carefully constructed world order. The woman they had dismissed as just a waitress was now potentially wealthier than their entire extended family combined. Marcus was the first to attempt damage control, rising from his chair with the diplomatic grace he'd learned in law school. "Sophia, this is incredible news. We should celebrate." "Should we?" I cut him off, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Celebrate what exactly? The fact that your family has spent 4 years treating me like hired help? Or the fact that it took a phone call about money to make you all look at me like I'm actually human?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to catch. Victoria's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the table, her mind clearly racing behind those calculating blue eyes. I could practically see her mental Rolodex flipping through social connections, charity boards, and country club hierarchies as she reassessed my sudden value in her social ecosystem. "Sophia, darling," Victoria began, her voice dripping with newly discovered warmth. "I think you may have misinterpreted our conversation earlier. We were simply making small talk about your work." "Small talk?" I laughed, the sound sharp and bitter in the formal dining room. "You told the Hendersons that Marcus married beneath his station. You've spent every family gathering for 4 years making sure I understand exactly where I fit in your social hierarchy. And now you want to call it small talk?" Harrison attempted to regain control of the situation with his practiced courtroom authority. "I think we're all being a bit emotional here. This is wonderful news for the family, and we should focus on—" "The family?" I interrupted, feeling something dangerous and powerful uncoiling inside me. "When exactly did I become family, Harrison? Was it when you introduced me to your golf buddies as Marcus's little wife who works at that place downtown? Or was it when you suggested I might be more comfortable eating in the kitchen with the staff during your anniversary party?" The memory of that particular humiliation was still fresh, even 2 years later. I had been dressed in my best outfit, a simple black dress from Macy's that had taken me 3 months to save for, and Harrison had looked me up and down before, suggesting that I might find the conversation more relatable with the catering staff. Priscilla, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally found her voice. "Sophia, I think you're being a little unfair. We've always been welcoming." "Welcoming?" The word exploded out of me with years of suppressed frustration. "You literally asked me last Christmas if I understood how to use the correct silverware. You made me sit through a 20-minute lecture about proper table manners because you were worried I would embarrass Marcus in front of his colleagues." The color in Priscilla's cheeks deepened. "That was just— I was trying to be helpful." "Helpful?" I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my photos until I found what I was looking for. "This is helpful." I turned the screen toward the table, showing them a photo from Marcus's last firm party. In it, I was standing alone by the appetizer table while Marcus networked across the room, his family clustered around him like a protective barrier. The caption I had written but never posted read, "Invisible at another family event." This is every family gathering, every work function, every social event for 4 years. I stand in corners while you all make sure everyone knows I don't really belong. You've perfected the art of exclusion so thoroughly that I started to believe I deserved it. Marcus reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Sophia, you're overreacting. My family has always accepted you." "Accepted me?" I turned to face him fully, seeing my husband clearly for perhaps the first time. "Marcus, you have never once defended me. Not once. When your mother makes her little comments about my background, you stay silent. When your father talks about my job like it's community service, You change the subject. When your sister openly mocks me, you find somewhere else to be. The truth of it settled over him like a physical weight. His shoulders sagged slightly as he seemed to realize that I wasn't wrong. In 4 years of marriage, he had chosen comfortable silence over defending his wife. That's not... I didn't realize... You didn't realize because you agreed with them, I said quietly, the words carrying the weight of 4 years of accumulated hurt. You married me despite my background, not because of who I am. You've been waiting for me to transform into someone worthy of your family name. Victoria cleared her throat delicately, clearly desperate to redirect the conversation. Perhaps we should discuss the practical implications of this inheritance. There will be tax considerations, investment strategies. There will be nothing, I said firmly. This is my inheritance from my family. The family you've all made very clear I should be ashamed of. The implications of my words hit them simultaneously. $80 million that would not be flowing into the Blackwood family coffers. $80 million that belonged entirely to the woman they had systematically marginalized and dismissed. Harrison's legal mind was clearly working overtime. Of course, as Marcus's wife, this would be considered marital property under New York law. Actually, I interrupted with a smile that felt predatory, it wouldn't. Inheritances are generally considered separate property, especially when they're bequeathed to one spouse specifically. But I'm sure you knew that, being such an accomplished attorney. The silence that followed was deafening. Harrison's face went through several shades of red as he realized his own legal expertise had just been used against him by the waitress he'd been condescending to for years. Besides, I continued, my confidence growing with each word, I think there are some conversations Marcus and I need to have about our marriage. Apparently, I've been laboring under some misconceptions about mutual respect and partnership. Marcus looked stricken. Sophia, please, don't let one difficult conversation destroy what we have. One conversation? I stared at him in disbelief. Marcus, this has been every conversation for 4 years. The only difference is that now you're all listening to my responses instead of talking over me. I walked to the ornate mirror hanging above the sideboard, looking at my reflection surrounded by the Blackwood family heirlooms. The woman staring back at me looked different somehow. Straighter spine, raised chin, eyes that held fire instead of resignation. You know what's funny? I said, still looking at my reflection. I spent 4 years trying to prove I was good enough for this family, working extra shifts to buy the right clothes, studying etiquette books, taking wine appreciation classes, learning about art and literature and classical music. I twisted myself into knots trying to become someone you could respect. I turned back to face them, feeling lighter than I had in years. It never occurred to me that maybe you weren't good enough for me. The silence in the dining room stretched, like a taut wire, ready to snap at any moment. I could see the Blackwood family's collective shock transforming into something more complex, a mixture of fear, calculation, and dawning realization that their carefully maintained power structure had just been obliterated. My phone buzzed again, and I glanced down to see a text from my best friend Carmen, who worked the morning shift at Ruby's Corner Cafe with me. Emergency at the restaurant. Can you come in early tomorrow? Also, call me ASAP. Something weird happened with some fancy lawyer looking for you. The mention of Ruby's, my workplace that had been the source of so much shame and ridicule, suddenly felt like a lifeline. These were people who knew me, respected me, valued my work ethic and character over my bank account or family connections. I need to make a call, I announced, heading toward the French doors that led to the Blackwood's sprawling back terrace. Sophia, wait, Marcus called after me, but I was already stepping outside into the crisp November air. Carmen answered on the first ring. Girl, where have you been? Some Beverly Hills lawyer type came by the cafe this afternoon asking all kinds of questions about you. Ruby nearly threw him out with a spatula until he explained he was trying to track you down about some inheritance thing. I leaned against the stone balustrade, looking out at the Blackwood's manicured gardens. Carmen, you're not going to believe what just happened. Try me. After 15 years of friendship, you'd be surprised what I'd believe about your life. I told her everything. The phone call, the $80 million, the stunned faces around the Thanksgiving table. Carmen's silence grew longer with each detail until I wondered if the call had dropped. Carmen? You still there? Holy shit, Sophia. Holy actual shit. You're telling me that while your in-laws were calling you just a waitress, you were sitting on one of the biggest inheritances in New York history? I had no idea. I didn't even know Eleanor was still alive, let alone that she'd been building some kind of business empire. This is insane. But also, and I'm saying this as someone who loves you, this is the best revenge story I've ever heard. Those snobby assholes must be choking on their organic turkey right about now. Through the French doors, I could see the Blackwood family engaged in intense discussion, their voices raised just enough to suggest heated debate. Marcus kept looking toward the terrace where I stood, his expression cycling between panic and calculation. There's more, I continued. I think this whole thing has made me realize some things about my marriage that I've been avoiding. Like what? Like the fact that Marcus has never once stood up for me. Like the fact that I've spent 4 years trying to prove I'm worthy of people who wouldn't cross the street to help me if I was bleeding on the sidewalk. Carmen's voice softened. Honey, I've been waiting 4 years for you to say that. Every time you came home from one of their family events, you looked like you'd been through a war, but you kept making excuses for them. I thought if I just tried harder, worked harder, became more sophisticated, you thought you could earn respect from people who had already decided you didn't deserve it, Carmen finished. Sophia, you've been the best employee Ruby's ever had. You turned that place around when old Ruby was ready to close it down. You created the weekend brunch menu that has people lining up around the block. You've been managing the books, training new staff, handling difficult customers. You've been running that place like a CEO. Her words hit me with unexpected force. In my family's relentless focus on what I lacked, the right education, the right connections, the right background, I had lost sight of what I had accomplished. Ruby's Corner Cafe wasn't just a job. It was a business I had helped save and transform. And now, Carmen continued with growing excitement, you've got the resources to do whatever the hell you want. You could buy Ruby's. You could start your own restaurant empire. You could tell every single one of those pretentious assholes exactly where they can stick their condescension. The thought was intoxicating. For the first time in years, I could see a future that wasn't defined by what others thought I should become, but by what I actually wanted to achieve. My phone buzzed with another call, this time from Ruby herself. I put Carmen on hold and answered. Sophia. Darling? Came Ruby's gravelly voice, shaped by 70 years of New York living and 30 years of running her cafe. I just had the most interesting conversation with a very expensive lawyer. Seems you've got some family business to attend to. Ruby, I can explain? Explain what? That you're about to become richer than God? Honey, I've been in this business long enough to spot quality when I see it. I've been telling everyone for years that you were too good for that fancy family of yours. Now the universe has decided to prove me right. Through the French doors, I could see Victoria pacing back and forth while Harrison gestured emphatically. Priscilla was on her phone, probably already spreading gossip to her social circle about the family's stunning reversal of fortune. Ruby, can I ask you something? Shoot. If someone offered to buy the cafe, would you consider selling? The pause that followed was filled with the weight of possibility. Ruby's Corner Cafe had been her life's work, but I knew she'd been struggling with arthritis and thinking about retirement. Depends on who's buying and what they plan to do with my life's work. What if it was someone who understood the value of what you built? Someone who wanted to honor what you created while maybe expanding it? Another pause. Sophia, are you making me an offer? I might be. Would you be interested in discussing it? Honey, if you're serious, we should talk. But not tonight. Tonight, you've got some family drama to sort through. After ending the call, I stood on the terrace for several more minutes, feeling the cool air clear my head. The woman who had walked into this house 6 hours ago, apologetic, diminished, grateful for scraps of acceptance, was gone. In her place stood someone I barely recognized but instinctively trusted. When I finally returned to the dining room, the conversation stopped abruptly. 4 pairs of eyes tracked my movement as I returned to my seat, but I noticed they were looking at me differently now. The casual dismissal had been replaced by wary attention. "Well," Victoria said with forced brightness, "I hope that was good news." "Actually, it was," I replied, settling back into my chair with new composure. "I was talking to my business partners about some upcoming opportunities." "Business partners?" Harrison's eyebrows shot up. "The people I work with at Ruby's Corner Cafe, you know, the little diner downtown that you find so amusing." I paused, letting the words settle. "We're discussing expansion plans." Marcus leaned forward, his legal instincts engaged. "What kind of expansion?" "The kind that requires significant capital investment, the kind that transforms small local businesses into regional success stories." I smiled, feeling power in the simple act of having information they wanted. The kind that people with vision and resources can make happen. The shift in dynamic was palpable. Suddenly, I wasn't the family charity case. I was a potential business mogul whose plans they desperately wanted to understand. And for the first time in 4 years, I was the one controlling the conversation. The next morning arrived with the kind of crystalline November clarity that made Manhattan look like a photograph. I stood in front of my closet at 7 a.m., staring at the carefully curated collection of clothes I'd assembled over 4 years of trying to fit into the Blackwood world. Conservative blazers in navy and charcoal, understated dresses that whispered rather than spoke, accessories chosen for their ability to blend rather than stand out. Today, I chose differently. The red dress I'd bought 2 years ago but never worn, because Victoria had made a cutting remark about appropriate colors for brunettes. The heels that added 3 inches to my height. The vintage necklace that had belonged to my grandmother. My real grandmother, not the Blackwood matriarchs whose portraits glared disapprovingly from every wall. Marcus had left early for his law firm, claiming an urgent brief needed his attention. We both knew he was avoiding the conversation that last night had made inevitable. The marriage that had felt strained for months now seemed to be held together by nothing more than habit and social expectation. The offices of Pemberton, Hayes, and Associates occupied an entire floor of a midtown skyscraper, all glass and steel and understated wealth. Theodore Pemberton himself turned out to be a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes that seemed to see through pretense. "Ms. Chen Blackwood," he said, rising from behind a desk that probably cost more than most people's cars. "Thank you for coming in so promptly. Please have a seat." The leather chair was butter soft, the kind of luxury I'd learned to appreciate during my years with the Blackwoods, but had never felt entitled to enjoy. Today, I settled into it like it belonged to me. "Before we discuss the financial details," Pemberton began, "your great-aunt left specific instructions that you should read her letter first. She was quite insistent about this." He handed me an envelope made of heavy cream paper, my name written across it in handwriting I dimly remembered from childhood birthday cards that had stopped coming when I was 8. "My dearest Sophia, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have learned that the black sheep of the Chen family was not quite as black as your mother believed. I have spent 40 years building something extraordinary, and I want you to understand why I disappeared from your life and why I have chosen you to inherit everything I've created. When I was 22, I fell in love with a woman named Margaret Whitmore. In 1982, this was not a love that could be spoken about openly, especially not in our traditional Chinese family. Your grandmother, my beloved sister Lily, tried to understand, but the shame was too great. I was asked to choose between my family and my heart. I chose love. Margaret and I moved to California, where we built a life together that spanned 38 years until her death 2 years ago. We also built a business empire that began with a small bed and breakfast in Napa Valley and grew into a luxury hospitality company with properties across the West Coast. I followed your life from a distance, Sophia. I knew about your father's death, your mother's struggles, your marriage to Marcus Blackwood. I hired private investigators to keep track of my family because I could never stop loving you all, even from exile. What I learned broke my heart. I watched you diminish yourself, year after year, trying to earn acceptance from people who would never see your worth. I watched you apologize for your background, your work, your very existence. I watched you become smaller and smaller until I barely recognized the bright, fierce little girl who used to demand extra bedtime stories. This inheritance is not charity, my dear one. It is recognition. You have always been worthy of extraordinary things. The money and businesses I am leaving you are tools to reclaim the life you deserve. But more than that, I want you to know your true family history. The Chens were not poor, immigrants grateful for scraps. Your great-great-grandfather owned the largest textile importing business on the West Coast before discriminatory laws forced him to sell. Your great-grandmother spoke 4 languages and managed the family's international correspondence. Your grandmother Lily could have been a doctor if women like us had been allowed in medical schools. You come from a line of powerful, brilliant women who built something from nothing. Never let anyone make you feel small again. The business is yours now. Do with it what your heart tells you. I have enclosed all the legal documents that will make you the sole owner of Whitmore Hospitality Group, as well as the personal accounts. That will give you the freedom to live as boldly as you choose. I am sorry I could not be there to watch you bloom into the woman you were always meant to be. But I am confident that you will honor our family's true legacy, not by being grateful for acceptance, but by being unapologetically magnificent. All my love, Great Aunt Eleanor P.S. The first property we bought is still operating as Eleanor's. Garden Inn in St. Helena. Margaret planted the rose garden there herself. I think you should see it. I read the letter twice, tears streaming down my face as pieces of my family's puzzle clicked into place. The whispered conversations that stopped when I entered rooms as a child. The way my mother's face would close off whenever Eleanor's name was mentioned. The mysterious, shameful circumstances that had never been explained. Your great aunt was quite remarkable, Pemberton said gently, handing me a tissue. I had the privilege of representing her business interests for over 20 years. She spoke about you often. She watched me, I whispered. All these years, she was watching me make myself smaller. She also watched you work. Did you know she dined at Ruby's Corner Cafe several times over the past 2 years? She was quite impressed with what you'd accomplished there. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Eleanor had been there, in my world, observing the life I'd built despite everything. She had seen me in my element, confident and capable, before I transformed into the apologetic shadow I became at Blackwood family gatherings. Pemberton spread a series of documents across his desk. The Whitmore Hospitality Group currently operates 12 luxury properties across California, Oregon, and Washington. The company is debt-free and has shown consistent profit growth for the past 15 years. The board of directors has been managing day-to-day operations, but they've been waiting for Eleanor's heir to provide long-term direction. 12 properties, I repeated, the number seeming impossible. Hotels, boutique resorts, and luxury bed and breakfasts. Eleanor had a gift for identifying undervalued properties in emerging markets and transforming them into destinations. The flagship property, Eleanor's Garden Inn, generates over $2 million in annual revenue alone. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. We need to talk about next steps. My father thinks we should meet with his financial advisor. I stared at the message, feeling a familiar tightness in my chest that I now recognized as the beginning of Another negotiation where my voice would be gradually minimized until I agreed to whatever the Blackwood men decided was best. Instead of responding, I turned back to Pemberton. What would happen if I wanted to expand the business? Add new properties? Maybe diversify into restaurants? His eyes lit up with interest. The company has the capital reserves and credit relationships to support significant expansion. Eleanor was quite conservative with debt, so there's substantial room for strategic growth. And I would have complete control? No partners or investors who could override my decisions? Complete control. Eleanor structured the ownership very carefully, to ensure her heir would never have to answer to anyone else for business decisions. I thought about Carmen's enthusiasm, about Ruby's quiet interest in retirement, about the dozens of small businesses I'd observed over the years that had potential, but lacked the capital to realize it. "Mr. Pemberton," I said, feeling a familiar surge of excitement that I hadn't experienced since my early days at Ruby's. "I think I'd like to schedule a trip to California. I want to see what my great-aunt built." "I can arrange that immediately. The staff at Eleanor's Garden is expecting you." As I signed document after document, transferring millions of dollars and an entire business empire into my name, I felt something fundamental shifting inside me. Not just the money, though that was certainly life-changing, but the permission Eleanor had given me to be extraordinary. For the first time in 4 years, I was making plans that belonged entirely to me. The flight to San Francisco felt like traveling to a different universe. As I settled into the first-class seat, my first-class seat, paid for with my own money, I realized this was the first major decision I'd made in years without consulting Marcus or considering what the Blackwood family would think appropriate. My phone had been buzzing incessantly since I'd left Pemberton's office, Marcus calling every hour, his messages growing increasingly frantic. Victoria had somehow gotten my number and left 3 voicemails, her tone shifting from concerned to cajoling to barely concealed panic. Even Harrison had reached out through his secretary requesting a family meeting to discuss shared interests and mutual opportunities. I turned off my phone. The rental car, a sleek BMW that the old me would have considered too flashy, handled the winding roads to Napa Valley like it was designed for this exact journey. As the urban sprawl gave way to rolling hills covered in dormant grapevines, I felt something inside me unclenching for the first time in years. Eleanor's Garden Inn appeared around a curve like something from a fairy tale. The Victorian mansion had been lovingly restored, its wraparound porches decorated with hanging baskets of winter flowers. The gardens Eleanor had mentioned in her letter stretched behind the building in carefully planned terraces, each level designed to frame a different view of the valley below. A woman in her 50s approached my car before I'd even turned off the engine. Her silver hair was pulled back in an elegant bun, and she wore the kind of effortless professional attire that suggested confidence rather than artifice. "You must be Sophia," she said, extending her hand with a warm smile. "I'm Diana Rodriguez, the general manager here. We've been so looking forward to meeting you." "You knew I was coming?" Eleanor called me the day before she died. She said her great-niece would be visiting soon and that I should treat you like family. She was very specific about showing you everything: the books, the operations, the staff areas. She wanted you to understand how it all works. Diana led me through the inn with obvious pride, explaining the occupancy rates, the seasonal patterns, the local partnerships that made the business successful. But what struck me most was how the staff interacted with her, and with me. There was respect without servitude, professionalism without hierarchy. It reminded me of the atmosphere I'd tried to create at Ruby's, where everyone contributed and everyone mattered. Eleanor had very specific ideas about hospitality, Diana explained as we toured the commercial kitchen. She believed that guests could sense when employees were genuinely happy versus when they were just performing happiness. So she made sure this was a place people actually wanted to work. The kitchen staff waved as we passed, and I noticed several calling out personal Greetings to Diana. How long have you worked here? I asked. 15 years. I started as a front desk clerk when I was going through my divorce. Eleanor took a chance on me when I had no hotel management experience, just a willingness to learn and work hard. Diana paused, studying my face. She mentioned that you understood something about working your way up. That evening, Diana had arranged for me to have dinner in the inn's private dining room, where Eleanor and Margaret had entertained friends during their decades together. The walls were covered with photographs documenting their life, business, openings, travel adventures, quiet moments in the gardens they'd created together. She talked about you often, Diana said, joining me for coffee after the meal. Especially in the last few years. She said she saw herself in you, someone with more potential than their circumstances suggested. She said in her letter that she hired investigators to keep track of me. Diana nodded. She knew about your marriage, your job, your husband's family. She was particularly angry about how they treated you. Angry? Eleanor had very strong opinions about people who mistook circumstances for character. She used to say that anyone who needed to make others feel small probably wasn't as big as they pretended to be. I thought about the Blackwood family's desperate attempts to contact me since yesterday's revelation. The sudden interest in my opinions, the eagerness to include me in financial planning discussions, the complete reversal from condescension to calculated charm. Diana, can I ask you something? If you were me, inherited all this, what would you do? She was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the gardens that were barely visible in the darkness beyond the windows. Eleanor asked me the same question, about 6 months ago. She wanted to know what I thought her heir should do with the business. What did you tell her? I told her that the business was successful because it reflected her values: quality, integrity, respect for employees, and genuine care for the guest experience. I said whoever inherited it should keep those values but make it their own. Make it their own how? Diana smiled. That's what Eleanor said you'd ask. She had some ideas, actually. She'd been researching restaurant concepts, small batch food, production, artisanal experiences. She thought the hospitality industry was ready for someone to bridge the gap between luxury and authenticity. The conversation continued late into the evening, Diana sharing Eleanor's business philosophies and her own observations about industry trends. By the time I returned to my room, a suite that Eleanor had specifically requested be held for my visit, my mind was racing with possibilities. The next morning, I woke before dawn and walked through Eleanor's rose garden as the sun painted the valley in shades of gold and rose. My phone, which I'd finally turned back on, showed 47 missed calls and 32 text messages. The Blackwood family's panic was reaching fever pitch. But as I stood among the roses that Margaret had planted decades ago, surrounded by the tangible evidence of a love story that had endured despite social disapproval and family rejection, I felt something crystallizing inside me. I called Carmen. "Girl, where the hell have you been?" Marcus showed up at Ruby's yesterday looking like someone had run over his dog. He kept asking if we knew where you were. "I'm in California, looking at my inheritance." "And? How's it feel to be stupidly rich?" "Terrifying, exciting, overwhelming." I paused, watching a hawk circle over the valley. "Carmen, how would you feel about becoming a business partner?" The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Sophia, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about expanding. Not just buying Rubies, but creating something bigger. A hospitality company that includes restaurants, but also hotels, event spaces, maybe even food production. Something that proves working-class people can build empires too." "Are you serious?" "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." Carmen's laughter was pure joy. "When do we start?" After we hung up, I called Theodore Pemberton to discuss the legal structures needed for expansion. Then I called Diana to schedule meetings with Eleanor's board of directors and key managers. Finally, I composed a single text message to Marcus. I'm extending my trip to California indefinitely. We'll talk when I return, but I need time to think about what I want our future to look like. For the first time in our marriage, I wasn't asking for permission or apologizing for my needs. I was simply stating my intentions and trusting that I had the right to make my own decisions. The woman who had sat silently through years of Blackwood family dinners was gone. In her place stood someone I was just beginning to meet. Someone with resources, vision, and the growing confidence to use both. The real transformation was just beginning. 3 weeks into my California stay, the inevitable confrontation arrived in the form of Marcus himself, appearing unannounced at Eleanor's Garden Inn with the kind of desperate determination that suggested his entire world was crumbling. I was in the middle of a business meeting with Diana and 2 potential restaurant partners when the front desk called to inform me that my husband was in the lobby, demanding to see me. Through the conference room windows, I could see him pacing near the reception area, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled in a way that would have horrified his image-conscious family. Should I have security escort him out? Diana asked quietly, her protective instincts clearly engaged. No, I said, surprising myself with my calm. But could you give us some privacy? I have a feeling this conversation has been a long time coming. The 2 restaurant partners, a James Beard Award winner and a sustainable farming advocate, gathered their materials with professional discretion. We'll continue this tomorrow, the chef said. Take all the time you need. Marcus entered the conference room like a man walking into his own execution. His usually confident attorney's bearing had been replaced by something that looked dangerously close to panic. We hadn't seen each other in person since Thanksgiving night, though his increasingly frantic calls and messages had painted a clear picture of his deteriorating situation. Sophia, he began, his voice carrying a pleading tone I'd never heard before. We need to talk. I assumed that's why you flew 3,000 miles, I replied, remaining seated at the polished conference table. The power dynamic was immediately clear. I was on my territory now, in control of the situation in a way that had never been possible in the Blackwood family domain. He sat across from me, and I noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the nervous energy in his hands as he fidgeted with his wedding ring. You can't just disappear like this. We're married. We have obligations to each other. Obligations, I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. Tell me, Marcus, what obligations do you feel you've fulfilled in our marriage? That's not fair, isn't it? I leaned forward, feeling a strength I'd never accessed in our previous arguments. For 4 years, I've fulfilled my obligations. I've been the perfect wife at your work functions, the gracious daughter-in-law at family gatherings, the supportive partner who never complained when your career took precedence over everything else in our lives. You're being dramatic. Am I? When was the last time you defended me to your family? When was the last time you showed genuine interest in my work, my thoughts, my dreams that didn't revolve around supporting your ambitions? Marcus opened his mouth to respond, then closed it, clearly struggling to find an example that would contradict my assessment. The truth is, I continued, our marriage has been a performance for so long that I'm not sure there's anything real left underneath. There's everything real underneath, he said desperately. Sophia, I love you. I know my family can be difficult, but they're coming around. After Thanksgiving, they've been asking about you constantly, wanting to include you more. After they learned about my inheritance, I interrupted. They're interested in me now because I have something they want, not because they've suddenly recognized my inherent worth. The flush that crept up his neck told me he couldn't deny this truth. People change their perspectives. What matters is that we can move forward as a family. Can we? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you flew here not because you miss your wife, but because you're panicking about losing access to $80 million. The accusation hit its target with precision. Marcus's carefully constructed composure cracked completely. That's not... I mean, of course the money matters, Sophia. We're talking about generational wealth. This changes everything for our future, for our children. Our children? I laughed, a sound without humor. Marcus, we've been married 4 years, and you've never once mentioned wanting children with me. In fact, when I brought it up last year, you said we should wait until my situation was more stable. Your job situation, my job situation that embarrassed your family, my background that needed improvement, my social skills that required coaching. Each phrase felt like lifting weights I'd been carrying for years. You've never wanted children. With me, Marcus. You've wanted children with the woman you hoped I might eventually become. He stood abruptly, beginning to pace in the confined space of the conference room. You're twisting everything. Yes, there have been adjustments, compromises on both sides. What compromises have you made? The question came out sharper than I'd intended. What have you given up or changed about yourself to accommodate our marriage? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Marcus stopped pacing, his hands gripping the back of his chair as he stared at the table. I thought so, I said quietly. Sophia, please, let's go home. Let's work through this together. We can use this opportunity to build something amazing. We? Or you and your family's financial advisors? His wince confirmed what I'd suspected. My father has some excellent investment strategies. Your father who spent 4 years making sure I knew exactly how little he thought of me? Your father who suggested I eat in the kitchen with the hired help at your parents' anniversary party? That father? He's trying to make amends. He's trying to access my money through you. I stood up, moving to the window that overlooked Eleanor's gardens. Marcus, your entire family's sudden acceptance of me is contingent on my ability to improve their financial situation. What happens when I make decisions they don't approve of? What happens if I want to invest in businesses they consider beneath their standards? That wouldn't happen. It's already happening. I turned to face him. I'm buying Ruby's Corner Cafe. I'm planning to expand it into a chain of worker-owned restaurants. I'm investing in sustainable farming operations and artisanal food production. I'm building something that reflects my values, not your family's idea of appropriate investments. The horror on his face was unmistakable. Sophia, you can't be serious. Ruby's is a diner. You're talking about throwing away millions on some idealistic... And there it is, I said softly. The real Marcus. The one who thinks my work is beneath notice. My dreams are naive. My values are idealistic rather than principled. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. And it's exactly how you've always seen me. As someone whose judgment can't be trusted, whose capabilities need management, whose dreams need correction. Marcus sank back into his chair, the fight seeming to drain out of him. What do you want from me, Sophia? What would it take to fix this? The question hung in the air, and I realized that for the first time in our relationship, he was asking what I wanted instead of telling me what I should want. I want you to go home, I said finally. I want you to think honestly about whether you married me because you loved who I was, or because you thought you could shape me into who you wanted me to be. And then what? Then we'll see if there's anything left to save. As Marcus left Eleanor's Garden Inn that evening, I watched his rental car disappear down the winding drive and felt something that surprised me. Not relief or triumph, but a profound sadness for the marriage we might have had if either of us had been brave enough to be completely honest from the beginning. The real test wasn't behind me. It was just beginning. 2 months after Marcus's visit to California, I found myself standing in the completely renovated Ruby's Corner Cafe, watching Carmen direct the installation of new equipment with the confidence of someone born to lead. The transformation was remarkable. We'd maintained the cozy neighborhood feel that regulars loved while upgrading everything from the kitchen to the point-of-sale system. The new espresso machine is a thing of beauty, Carmen called out, grinning. as she supervised the technicians. "I can't believe we went from that ancient beast that took 10 minutes to make a cappuccino to this Italian masterpiece." Ruby herself sat at her favorite corner table, watching the proceedings with a mixture of pride and amazement. At 73, she'd been ready to retire. But the generous buyout offer I'd made allowed her to stay on as a consultant while pursuing her long-delayed dream of writing a cookbook. "You know," Ruby said as I joined her, "when that fancy lawyer first came looking for you, I thought it was trouble. Never imagined it would turn into this." The "this" she referred to was the pilot program for what we were calling the Garden Chain, worker-owned restaurants that combined Ruby's community-focused approach with Eleanor's commitment to employee empowerment. The original Ruby's would be the flagship, with 3 additional locations planned for the next year. "Eleanor would have loved this," I said, looking around at the bustling cafe. "Building something that serves the community instead of just extracting profit from it." My phone buzzed with a text from Diana in California. "Board meeting went perfectly. Expansion into Oregon approved unanimously. The Ashland property will be gorgeous. The Whitmore Hospitality Group had been growing steadily under my direction, but always with careful attention to Eleanor's original values. We'd acquired 2 new properties and were renovating a historic hotel in Portland that would become our first urban location." "Speaking of texts," Carmen said, approaching our table with a knowing look, "your phone's been buzzing all morning. Let me guess, Blackwood family drama?" I glanced at my phone to see 3 missed calls from Victoria and a text from Priscilla. "We really need to talk. This can't continue indefinitely." The Blackwood family's behavior over the past 2 months had been a masterclass in desperation disguised as concern. After Marcus returned from California empty-handed, they'd cycled through various strategies: guilt trips about family unity, veiled threats about divorce proceedings, and increasingly transparent attempts to involve themselves in my business decisions. "They're persistent. I'll give them that," I said, setting the phone aside. "Victoria called yesterday to suggest I might want to diversify my portfolio with some of Harrison's investment opportunities." Carmen snorted. "The same people who spent 4 years treating you like the help now want to be your financial advisors?" The irony isn't lost on me. What had surprised me most was Marcus's relative silence during his family's campaign. After our confrontation in California, he'd returned to New York and seemed to withdraw from the aggressive pursuit of my inheritance. His texts had become infrequent and strangely formal, as if he were processing something fundamental about our relationship. The cafe's front door chimed, and I looked up to see a familiar figure entering. Not a Blackwood, but someone equally unexpected. Elena Vasquez, a food critic from New York Magazine, approached our table with a warm smile. "Sophia Chen?" she said, extending her hand. "I'm Elena Vasquez. I've been following the story of Ruby's transformation, and I was hoping we could talk." Carmen raised her eyebrows at me, clearly impressed. Elena Vasquez was a legend in the New York food scene, known for her tough reviews and her championing of innovative dining concepts. Same philosophy, different application. Eleanor, my great-aunt, built her business on the idea that hospitality is about creating genuine experiences, not just performing service. Whether it's a hotel or a cafe, the principle is the same. When employees feel valued and empowered, guests notice the difference. Elena nodded thoughtfully. "I'd like to write about this. Not just a restaurant review, but a feature on the business model and its potential impact on the industry." After Elena left, Carmen pulled me aside with barely contained excitement. "Do you realize what just happened? Elena Vasquez wants to write about us in New York Magazine. This could change everything." "It could," I agreed, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "Are you ready for that level of attention? Are you kidding? I've been ready my whole life. The question is, are you ready to be the face of something this big?" The question stayed with me as I walked home that evening, to the small apartment I'd rented in the neighborhood near Ruby's. I'd made the decision to leave the Beacon Hill house after returning from California, needing space to think without the constant reminder of the life I'd been trying to fit into. The apartment was tiny compared to the Blackwood mansion, but it felt like mine in a way that house never had. I'd decorated it with art from local artists, furniture that reflected my taste rather than someone else's idea of appropriate style, and books that I actually wanted to read. My phone rang as I was preparing dinner, a simple pasta dish that I'd learned to make during my time in California. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and for once, I felt curious rather than apprehensive about talking to him. "Hi, Marcus." Sophia. His voice was different, quieter, less performative. "I saw the news about Ruby's reopening. Congratulations." "Thank you. How did you hear about it?" "Elena Vasquez called me for a quote. She's doing a feature story." I paused, surprised. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that I'd never seen you happier or more confident than you are now. That whatever you're building, it's clearly what you were meant to do." The admission hung between us, honest in a way our conversations hadn't been for years. "Marcus," I said softly, "are you okay?" "I've been thinking a lot about what you said in California, about whether I married you for who you were or who I thought you could become." He paused. "I think we both know the answer to that." "What does that mean for us?" "It means I want to figure out if there's a way forward that doesn't require either of us to be someone we're not." For the first time in months, I heard possibility in his voice rather than desperation. Not the possibility of returning to what we'd had, but the possibility of discovering what we might become if we were both brave enough to be completely honest. The conversation that followed was unlike any we'd had in 4 years of marriage. Real, difficult, and finally, authentic. 6 months later, I stood on the terrace of Eleanor's Garden Inn, looking out over the valley that had become my second home, preparing for a celebration that would have been unimaginable a year ago. The New York Magazine feature had transformed the garden chain from a local experiment into a national conversation about worker ownership and authentic hospitality. 3 more locations had opened across New York, 2 in California, and inquiries were pouring in from entrepreneurs wanting to franchise the model. But tonight wasn't about business success. Tonight was about something more personal and infinitely more complex. Carmen emerged from the inn's main building, resplendent in a deep emerald dress that complemented her role as my business partner and closest friend. "The guests are starting." "To arrive," she said, her excitement barely contained. "Ruby's already holding court in the main parlor, telling everyone about her cookbook deal." "And the others?" "Diana's coordinating with the catering staff. Honestly, that woman could run the Pentagon if she wanted to. Your mother just arrived with your aunt, and they look appropriately stunned by all this." Carmen paused, her expression becoming more serious. "The Blackwoods are here too." I nodded, having expected this moment of reckoning. The invitation I'd extended to Marcus's family hadn't been about forgiveness or reconciliation. It had been about closure, about demonstrating once and for all that their acceptance was no longer something I needed or wanted. "How do they look?" "Like people attending a funeral for their own relevance," Carmen said with characteristic bluntness. Victoria keeps staring at the other guests like she's trying to figure out why she doesn't recognize anyone from her usual social circuit. That was intentional. The celebration was filled with people who had supported me during my transformation. Employees from both the restaurants and the hotels, local business owners who had become partners, friends I'd made during my California stays, and industry colleagues who respected what we were building. The Blackwoods would find themselves surrounded by exactly the kind of people they'd spent years dismissing as beneath their notice. "And Marcus?" Carmen's expression softened slightly. "He's different, quieter. He's been having long conversations with your restaurant managers about profit-sharing models. I think he's actually trying to understand what you've built here. The relationship between Marcus and me had evolved into something neither of us had expected. After months of difficult conversations, couples therapy, and painful honesty, we'd arrived at an unusual arrangement. We were separated but not divorced, exploring what it meant to know each other as adults, rather than the roles we'd performed during our marriage. Marcus had made changes too. He'd left his father's law firm to start a practice focused on cooperative business structures and worker rights, a career pivot that had shocked his family almost as much as my inheritance had. We weren't living together, weren't sure if we ever would again, but we were slowly building something that felt more authentic than what we'd had before. "Ms. Chen?" A young woman approached, tablet in hand, and the efficient air of a professional. "Coordinator." The documentary crew would like to do the final interview segment now, before the formal presentation begins. The documentary had been another unexpected development. A filmmaker had approached me after the New York Magazine article, interested in chronicling the transformation of both the businesses and my personal journey. The final product would air on a streaming platform next month, already generating advance buzz about authentic American entrepreneurship. I followed the coordinator to a quiet corner of the terrace, where the camera crew had set up with a backdrop of the valley and the rose garden that Margaret had planted decades ago. The director, a thoughtful woman named Jessica Chen, no relation, despite the shared surname, had become something of a friend during the filming process. "This is the final interview," Jessica explained as the sound technician clipped a microphone to my dress. "I want to focus on transformation, not just business transformation, but personal. You've become someone completely different from the woman who sat at that Thanksgiving table 11 months ago. Have I?" I settled into the chair they'd positioned for me, considering the question. "Sometimes I think I've just become who I always was underneath, but was too afraid to let anyone see." "Tell me about that fear." I looked out at the gardens, gathering my thoughts. I spent so many years believing that love required diminishment, that to be worthy of acceptance, I had to make myself smaller, quieter, less threatening to other people's sense of themselves. I thought that was compromise, that it was maturity. What changed your understanding? Eleanor's letter, learning that she had chosen love over family approval, authenticity over social acceptance. She showed me that there's a difference between compromise and self-erasure. Compromise is two people meeting in the middle. Self-erasure is one person disappearing to make the other comfortable. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, Jessica drawing out reflections I hadn't fully articulated before. When we finished, I felt clearer about the journey I'd taken and the person I'd become. As the sun began to set, guests gathered in the inn's main parlor for the evening's central event. I'd asked Diana to prepare a presentation about the expansion of Whitmore Hospitality Group, but the real purpose was more personal. Tonight, I was announcing the establishment of the Eleanor Chen Whitmore Foundation, dedicated to supporting women entrepreneurs from working-class backgrounds. The foundation would provide not just funding, but mentorship, business education, and most importantly, permission to dream bigger than their circumstances might suggest was possible. It was my way of honoring Eleanor's legacy, while creating opportunities for others who might be sitting at their own version of the Blackwood Thanksgiving table, being told they were just whatever their current circumstances happened to be. "Before we begin," I said, standing before the assembled crowd, "I want to thank everyone who made this evening possible. Not just tonight, but the entire journey that brought us here." I found my mother in the crowd, tears already streaming down her face as she realized the magnitude of what her daughter had accomplished. Ruby, beaming with pride from her wheelchair near the front. Carmen, my partner in every sense that mattered. Diana, who had taught me that leadership could be both powerful and kind. And there, near the back, the Blackwood family. Victoria and Harrison looking distinctly uncomfortable among the diverse crowd of entrepreneurs, workers, and creators. Priscilla scrolling through her phone with barely concealed boredom. And Marcus, watching me with an expression I'd never seen before, Not desire or calculation or even love, but respect. Pure, uncomplicated respect for the person I'd become. 11 months ago, I continued, I was a woman who believed her worth was determined by other people's approval. Tonight, I stand before you as the owner of 12 properties, the founder of 8 restaurants, and the director of a foundation that will support hundreds of women entrepreneurs over the coming decades. The applause was warm and genuine, but I raised my hand for silence. But those accomplishments aren't what transformed me. What transformed me was learning that I didn't need permission to be extraordinary. That my background, my work, my values, the things I'd been taught to apologize for were actually my strengths. I paused, looking directly at the Blackwood family. To everyone who ever called someone just a waitress or just anything else, you're missing the point. There are no just people. There are only people whose potential you're not bothering to see. The applause this time was thunderous, and I saw several people wiping away tears. In the back, Victoria Blackwood looked as if she'd been slapped, while Harrison studied his hands with the intensity of someone who'd finally understood exactly what he'd lost. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Marcus approached, me on the terrace where I'd stepped out for air. That was quite a speech, he said, joining me at the railing. Did you disagree with any of it? No. That's what makes it so powerful. He was quiet for a moment. Sophia, I owe you an apology that goes deeper than anything I've said before. Marcus, please, let me say this. He turned to face me fully. I didn't just fail to defend you to my family. I failed to see you at all. I was so focused on the life I thought we should have that I never bothered to discover what kind of life you actually wanted. We both made mistakes. No, this one's on me. And I want you to know that watching you become who you really are has been the most incredible thing I've ever witnessed. Even if we never find our way back to each other romantically, I'm grateful I got to see this transformation. Standing there in the garden that Margaret had planted and Eleanor had tended, surrounded by the success I'd built from my own vision and values, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete integration. The personal and professional, the past and future, the dream and reality, all of it finally aligned. The woman who had answered that lawyer's phone call at Thanksgiving dinner was gone. In her place stood someone I was proud to be. Unapologetically, successful, authentically powerful, and absolutely certain that she had never been just anything. The transformation was complete. The extraordinary life was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.